everyone, my name is Brittany Hartzell and I work for the Columbia County Conservation District. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about pollinators. And pollinators are really important bugs and other critters that live outside in the wild. And what they do for us is not only help flowers and other types of plants continue to reproduce and make more of themselves, but they also are really vital for our agricultural systems. So things like apples and peaches, or even tomatoes and all the different types of fruits that you eat, a lot of them really rely on pollinators in order to come into existence and end up on our grocery shelves. So today I'm going to talk to you about pollinators. And traditionally, most people, when they think about pollinators, they'll think about bees. They think about those honeybees that are outside and they visit the flowers every once in a while. They are super important for those things that I talked about earlier, for flowers and for fruits and vegetables. But there's not just bees. There's a lot of other different types of pollinators out there. There's a bunch of butterflies and moths. There's a couple of bats that'll actually pollinate, hummingbirds, which is just a special treat whenever you see them. There's a whole bunch of different types of animals, even flies and beetles will pollinate our plants. But today we're going to focus primarily on these honeybees here. There's actually a whole bunch of different types of bees. There's actually just thousands of different species, and you guys are probably familiar with the honeybee, but there's also the big bumblebees that you see. We have little green bees, wasps will also pollinate. We have just a whole variety of different sizes and colors and shapes. And what's really interesting and unique about these bees is that typically a lot of these are actually solitary bees. So what that means is they live on their own. They don't need a hive like you're normally seeing with honeybees. So they might dig inside of a little piece of wood, or they might dig into the ground. So these are really important habitats for these bees to survive and to use as shelter. So there's a whole bunch of different species of bees, and they also like to specialize and go to certain types of flowers. And that's another really important aspect for bees, is that they need a whole bunch of different types of flowers. If you look down here, I just in this field here collected 13 different species of flowers I was able to find. All of these flowers provide nectar and pollen for the bees to eat. So nectar is like a sweet juice. It's a really sugary juice that the bees can get in there and drink, and that's what they use as food. So while they're in there eating the food, they also pick up the pollen. So pollen is that thing that might make you sneeze in the early spring. It's that yellow stuff that comes off a flower, and it is really nutritious for the bees, but it also helps the flowers make more flowers. So it's really a very interesting balance of bees helping flowers and the flowers help the bees at the same time. Bees have a very unique life cycle. They start off in different stages. So a bee will, in its nest or in its hive, lay a little egg. And it's just this tiny little egg. It looks like a little grub. And that thing is eating the honey that you see and the nectar and the pollen that the other bees bring over to it. So that guy is he's gonna grow up in a little tiny cell like you see here, either in a hive or in a wood or within the ground. And he's gonna grow up into what we call a larvae. So this guy here is a larvae. So they're a little bit bigger. Again, they look like a big grub, but they're starting to develop. You can see they have little sections that they're starting to develop, and that's very traditional for most insects to do. As these guys continue growing older and getting bigger, this is called a pupae. So pupae is starting to develop its eyes and its wings, and you can start seeing the sections are starting to move down closer to this body, and it's getting its little legs and everything so it can become a bee. When it's finally ready to hatch and it's got all of its nutrients and it became a bee, this is what we typically think of when we see bees. So you see the wings that come out. Some bees will have a stinger and some won't. Traditionally, a lot of them are black and yellow, but we also have a whole bunch of other colored bees. They have little antennae, and they also have a little proboscis that you'll see here, and that's what helps them dig inside of that flower and drink that nectar. Another really important aspect of bees is that they have little hairy bodies. So if you're able to get close up enough to a bee, you'll see that there's little tiny hairs all over the body. And that's what's picking up that pollen I keep talking about. So they pick up the pollen and they go to other flowers trying to get their food. And what happens is they end up taking that pollen and bringing it over to another flower, and they really start mixing up all the pollen, which allows the flowers the ability to survive a little bit better. So I'll demonstrate this over here on this poster here. So here's a flower, and what they have is if you take a flower from your backyard and look at it pretty closely, you'll notice it has these little structures. So of course we have our petals here, and that's a thing that's very colorful and pretty that we like to look at. But if you look on the inside, we have these little things that come out here, and these guys are called stamens. And at the very top of them, they have pollen. So that's what the bee is picking up when it's visiting the flower. Now when the bee comes into the flower, he is drinking this sweet nectar that's down here in this little section of the flower here. So he is drinking it and picking up all these little yellow flowers, and pollen, I'm sorry. And so he goes from flower to flower and he's doing the same thing. So all that pollen that he's picking up on his little hairy wings, he's going to other flowers and dropping it off at those flowers. So he gets to eat and the flowers get to make more flowers. So everyone wins. And like I said, they're super important for farming and the foods that you eat. So if we don't have bees, we won't be able to have tomatoes or apples, cucumbers, or any other type of flowering vegetable or fruit that we really enjoy. So even cocoa, so think about it, if we don't have bees, we wouldn't have chocolate, we don't want that to happen. So protecting the bees is super important, and we need them for ourselves, they need them for the flowers, and the flowers need them for us. So everyone benefits if we have pollinators. One last thing to think about when we talk about pollinators is where they live. So some of them will live inside of the ground or in wood, or they'll have hives. And this is actually called a mason bee hive. So what they do is once again, they're those solitary bees, so they live on their own. So a bee will actually pick a little hole out of the wood. So if you have dead wood in your backyard, that's really beneficial for bees. They'll actually go inside of these holes and they'll lay their little eggs like I showed you earlier. And they'll cover that with some mud, and then they'll come back in and lay another egg. And they do that until the holes are filled up. So these provide great shelter and places for those little tiny eggs to grow into the larvae and the pupil, and then finally the bee. So these are really important, and if you are interested in helping bees out, one really great thing you can do is provide them habitats like these. Your parents can buy them in a store, or you can make them yourself. You can even just find a piece of dead wood or a log, and that'll help the bees as well. Another thing, if you want to help protect bees in your backyard, is trying to plant some more flowers. Native flowers that are local to Pennsylvania are ideal, but again, a whole variety of different types of flowers will really help those bees survive. So it'll give them more nectar to drink and more pollen for themselves, and it'll also at the same time help the flowers grow as well. So it's something you guys can do in your own free time while you're home and looking for some fun things to do. Go in your own backyard and explore a little bit. The flowers that I found here, I found 13 different species. So I challenge you guys to try to go out in your own backyards and see how many different types of flowers you have in your own backyard for bees. More than 13 if you can. You can also even just sit down in the grass and watch the bees and just try to watch their behaviors. Bees are not going to hurt you as long as you don't try to go up and grab them. So just sit down and try to observe the bees and watch them a little bit, and you might be surprised what you find out.